for this next shot, we are actually going to be going up in a helicopter to do some aerial photography of the resort. Now, I know a lot of you guys out there are going to be wondering, well, why don't you just use a drone? And in some cases, yeah, that might be totally acceptable, but there are a number of reasons why I use a helicopter, and there are a number of reasons why you could also use a drone. Now, for this particular application, we needed very high quality pictures because we know that these were probably going to be used in print. So what we ended up doing was we used a Canon 5DSR, and in order to get a drone to pick up a big camera like that, it's probably going to be priced similarly to just renting a helicopter. Another reason is that a lot of these places are actually very tough to fly drones in due to FAA regulations requiring that you be 5 miles from an airport while you're flying. So we didn't really want to mess with that. The Kona airport was right down the coast. We want to kind of keep everything above board and legal again, so it was like, hey, let's just go with a helicopter. Now, this resort was actually very anti-drone. People value their privacy, and it's kind of a selling point of that resort. So the hotel says if you're coming as a tourist, you're not allowed to fly a drone. So we actually had to get special permission to do a lot of our drone shots for this. But again, for the photos that we were going to be delivering, they had to be high resolution, so we went and opted for the helicopter. Now, it's actually relatively cheap, all things considered. To rent a helicopter is anywhere from $400 to $900 an hour, depending on how many seats it has. And if you weigh that against the actual price of the photography, it's not that expensive. We took this helicopter up for about 45 minutes, and that got us all the shots we need. So for an investment of about $600, we got everything we wanted. Now, let's talk about planning these shots. You don't want to just throw money at it and go up without having a plan. So what I do is I usually start to look at everything on Google Maps, and I will kind of zoom around in the satellite view and have a rough idea of where I need to be and how I want to direct the pilot when we're out there. So while I'm planning, I'm thinking about not only the location, but I'm also thinking about the lighting. You have to make sure that your subject has the correct light on it. So we're trying to get some aerial shots of the resort, something a little bit different that we haven't taught yet. And the goal here is obviously to get this in bright sun. Again, I want a shot that we haven't taken yet. I don't want a sunset shot, I don't want a twilight shot. I want the bright green, bright blue, stereotypical sunny Hawaii. And the problem that we're running into is every single afternoon without fail, everything clouds over. So we have to do it in the morning. And I'm not in love with the light that we have right now, but I think it could be interesting. So I know we're gonna be pretty high. I know it's gonna be slightly backlit. I don't want it to be completely backlit, but I do want an angular backlight, if you know what I mean. So I'd like to have one side of the building in sun, the front in shadow, rather than having the entire building in shadow, but we're gonna see what it's like. I've done my best to plan this with a little sun tracking app on my phone. But again, we're kind of in a time crunch because around noon or 1 o'clock every day, and you can see them over on the left-hand side there, these clouds start to roll in and cover everything. So I think the best light will be between 10:30 and 11:30, maybe 11 and 12. It really just depends on, it's tough to say because the sun is so overhead, we're so close to the equator here, that it's gonna be, pretty similar light over the course of 3 or 4 hours here. So I think the most important thing though is that we do get that direct sun on it to get the color. I do want that bright green, the bright blue, see the foliage, see into the ocean. You can see, it's really cool. If you look at some images of water from above in Hawaii, you can see the coral reefs and everything underneath it. I don't like those bright white sand beaches. And I know if we waited too long and those clouds rolled in, I'm actually a little bit worried. But if we waited too long, it would just flatten everything out and make it really dull, and we'd lose that brilliant green and blue color that I want. So now in general, the best time of day to shoot in a helicopter really depends on the look you're going for. Like I said, in this case, we do want a bright, saturated green and blue, kind of stereotypical Hawaiian sunshine feel. Usually when I shoot, I do like to go up in the golden hour. It does give nice elongated shadows to everything, brings out a lot of depth and texture. But we kind of already did that shot with the pool. And I want to teach you guys something different, and I want to deliver something else to the hotel so they have different options and different light, different color palettes, that sort of thing. So we're going to do our best to fit this in this little time window that we have, and hopefully everything works out. So we booked a helicopter. I think this was one of their higher end models, and I think if I remember correctly, it was $900 an hour, and like I said, we were up there for about 45 minutes, so the bill came to something in the $600 range. So when you're investing this kind of money, you want to make sure you get on the phone with your pilot and make sure he knows what's going on. You have to clearly communicate that it is a photo shoot flight Otherwise, you're going to show up and the doors are still going to be on the helicopter, and it's pretty much impossible to make professional photography with the doors on the helicopter. If you don't like heights, you're going to have to get used to this. You're going to be strapped in, but that door is going to be off, and you are going to be looking straight down hundreds of feet at the ground. So make sure that the door is off. Now, when it comes to gear, even though the door is off, it's a very, very tight space. I recommend that you take 2 bodies and 2 lenses and you keep them both strapped on you at all times. It is very, very important that everything is very secure. If you can run a strap through a seatbelt or through a 5-point harness, even better. Some companies won't even allow you to change lenses in the helicopter because if a lens falls out and lands on a house or a person or a car or whatever, the liability could be out of control. Now, I've done some shoots over airports and things get even more complicated there because if a lens falls out on an airport, it's like the worst thing that could ever happen, right? So make sure that your gear is super secure. This is not only the cameras and the lenses, but the lens caps and any accessories that you have on the body. I personally don't even bring lens caps up when I'm in a helicopter. I don't want to worry about it. There's not enough space to be banging around and having your lens hood, get stuck on the edge of the door. So I just forget about lens hoods. So like I said, I bring 2 bodies. I always have a 24-70. Now this is just personal preference, but my main body and main camera are going to have a 24-70 lens on it. If you go wider than 24, what generally happens is you start to get the skid of the helicopter in the shot, and that's no good. And I find that that's basically a perfect focal length for getting those wide, epic landscape shots. Now your second body can be up to you. I've used an 85mm prime lens to get really low light shots. I've used a 24mm tilt shift when I'm shooting architecture. I've used a 7200 to get details. It all depends on your subject and what you're going for. I knew I wanted to get wide shots here, so I left the 7200, but a lot of the time when I'm doing some of my fine art work, I'll bring the 7200 for a different look. Another really important thing is to make sure that your lenses have image stabilization because the helicopter is just going to be vibrating constantly the whole time, and anything you can do to dampen that vibration will go a long way to making your shots a lot sharper. If you were shooting in a lower light environment, or if you were shooting with a medium format camera with a very, very pixel dense sensor, you might want to look into renting a gyro for your shoot. Now a gyro is basically a big series of gyroscopes that hang off the bottom of your camera. You screw it into the tripod mount, and it just basically dampens out all that movement and vibration. They can be really big and really heavy, so make sure you practice with one on the ground before you go up in a helicopter. If you're not going to be shooting with a gyro, or you're just going to be shooting in daylight on a DSLR, that brings me to my next subject, shutter speed. I have found that any shutter speed over about 1/1250th of a second is adequate for freezing motion. You can get away with a little bit lower if you're shooting wider, like maybe 1/640th of a second, but I try to keep it as absolutely fast as possible. Even in broad daylight, I'll go up to ISO 320, f5.6 or something, and make sure my shutter speed is probably at least above 1/1000th to guarantee sharp photos. So before we took off, we had a little meeting with the pilot, and we told him what we were going for. We talked about all of the airspace restrictions. If you're flying in more populated areas, there might be TFRs, which are temporary flight restrictions, which are areas that you cannot fly in. We were actually flying relatively close to an airport and a military base, so we did have to be conscious, but luckily they did not impact our shooting plans that much. So for this shoot, what I wanted my pilot to do is I wanted him to do what are called orbits, which are basically big circles around the subject. Now, I had him start relatively high, about 1,000 feet, and I had him spiral down and basically closer and closer until we were just a few hundred feet off of the surface of the water. Once we did that, I had a pretty good idea of how the subject responded to different focal lengths and different heights, and I was better able to plan our money shot. So we did our big spiral down, and I kind of knew exactly where I wanted to be. And I told them, all right, let's do a couple more orbits. I want to be at, say, 400 feet. I'm always keeping an eye on the altimeter so I know what a good height is. I say, I want to be at about 400 feet. Let's do a nice wide orbit, and that's hopefully going to be our money shot. And of course, he can hover and position and go back and forth, but that big preliminary orbit is really what's going to give you your bearings and put you exactly where you want to be for your money shot. Now, because you're burning so much money when you're up in a helicopter, it is imperative that you keep your eye in the viewfinder and you're very confident when you know you have your money shot. So when the subject is in front of me, I will almost never take my eye out of the camera. I am always shooting as much as I possibly can because, again, we're blowing through money like crazy on this. We want to make sure we nail it. And again, when I do think that I nail it, I'm very confident I can say, all right, pilot, on to the next shot. So you have to already kind of have a plan, a vision in your head, and once you meet that expectation or get that final shot, you can say, all right, on to the next one, because every second is costing you money. All right, so even though we were in the helicopter for 45 minutes, only about 20 of those minutes were spent actually photographing the hotel. We did have some time in transit from the airport to our location. However, while we were on the way out there, I also kept an eye out for really cool details, things like surfers, paddleboarders, sailboats, and I was just casually shooting those as well. And I might have the pilot do a quick little turn or an orbit to put me in position just to get some of those extra detail shots that I can deliver on top of those wide money shots. And now, these detail shots are very useful for the client if they're putting together a brochure and they kind of want some shots that describe the area a little bit better. And it's kind of cool to just mix it up a little bit. Instead of just having a wide sort of overview of the hotel, I was really happy to get to deliver some shots that showed people actually using the hotel, using the areas around the hotel for paddleboarding and surfing and sailing, that sort of thing. So always keep your eye out for little contextual things around your subject that could add to the value that you're delivering to your client. Okay, so we have hundreds of shots of this hotel. Let's go into Lightroom, pick our favorite ones, and get them ready for delivery. I personally think flying in a helicopter is one of the best parts of being an architectural photographer. It is so much fun and it's just so different than what we normally do, so every time we go up, I just have a total blast. Now, as we're jumping into post here, I want to take a minute to explain how aerial photos are a bit different than normal architectural photos. So when I'm normally shooting architecture, obviously I'm on the ground, I have a tripod, my camera is basically always attached to a tripod when I'm shooting on the ground. However, obviously when we're in a helicopter, things don't quite work like that. I can't composite multiple frames together. I have to really rely on getting there at the right time of day and doing all of my adjustments, or at least 80% of them, in Lightroom. We're going to really push these raw files and really get the most out of them rather than bracket and composite lights in and all that kind of stuff like I would do if I was on a tripod. So for these edits are going to be, like I said, 80% in Lightroom, pushing and pulling that raw file, keeping it simple to start. All right, so we've already culled these down to a manageable number. I just want to take a minute to kind of walk through and show you why I like certain shots and why I don't like other certain shots. Now, for example, in this shot, this does a really good job of placing the hotel in an environment. We have this amazing blue water. We've got the nice transition to this aquamarine teal water. We do have the beach. We have some of the golf course. And it feels pretty epic, right? Like it's a great landscape, but I think we're just a little bit too wide. We're not really focusing on what's important. We could probably do without 80% of this water. We could still show the coastline and get much more of the hotel and the grounds. So as we kind of come around, we start to shift into a more appropriate area here. And again, this is looking really good, but I feel like we're just too wide. We make the hotel feel almost small. So again, I like these. I might end up using them, but I think they're just too wide for now. Now, as we move along, we kind of did a loop right in front of the hotel here. And this one, I do like this, but I feel like it's, instead of being too wide, we're not really close enough to make the hotel feel big, and we're cutting out a lot of the environment. We're missing the mountains and the sky, and I really do want to show off that like signature blue island sky that you're going to get in the Pacific Ocean. And again, this, while it is really cool, I much prefer this deep sort of, stereotypical island blue for the water. So we do have this rocky shoreline here, but it's not as attractive to me as this blue water. So I don't think I'm going to end up doing a ton of editing on this one. Again, we'll keep it to the side for now. And like I said, while we were in the helicopter, I'm always looking out for cool little moments that I can deliver alongside the wide hero shots. And stuff like this, where we have a bit of personality. We've got some paddle boarders in a boat. It's kind of a very graphic aerial shot that we can deliver to sort of pump up the amount of photos that we give and give the hotel some more options when they're making brochures or websites or advertisements, that sort of thing. So these are just, again, little detail shots that I will deliver along with the wide hero shots. So moving along, we're starting to get a bit closer. I do like this. Again, we're a bit crooked here, so we can just go ahead and straighten it out. We have a lot of water, and we are kind of starting to get this epic landscape, which I like. But again, I do think this is too wide, too much blue water, and I feel like the lighting is not as contrasty or dynamic as it could be. And I know that to the left-hand side, there's some really cool mountains and clouds, so let's keep going on. And again, we get closer. This one I do like. This is pretty tight. Again, that water, this is almost kind of like a brownish blue. I do like that crystal blue much better. So I think that sort of problem applies to all of these close-up shots where you have this really craggy, rocky coastline. It's not as inviting as that nice deep blue. So we'll keep looking through here. This one's pretty nice. But again, same problem. And these are all really cool too, but I feel like we could go wider. We could get a little higher to actually let people know that this is in fact a golf course here and it's part of the hotel. Because right now we're so low, we're kind of flattening out that landscape and you can't see down there. So moving along, lots more of this foreground which is taking up so much of the frame, and we're so low that we've kind of diminished. We don't have enough of an angle to see anything more than the hotel itself, and there's so much more to this resort than just this one building. So moving right along here, I do like this angle. We're starting to get some of the mountains back here, some sky. We've got great blue water, a couple paddle boarders. Again, another problem that I see is we're still a bit low. We don't really see the golf course or anything. If we come up a bit, now we're kind of in business here, right? If I straighten this out, we've got sky, clouds, mountains, blue water, and we can actually see that golf course down there. We start to put the whole thing together. And again, some detail shots that I might pull some cool crops out of to deliver alongside the wide shots. This one I thought was pretty interesting here. This is a vertical shot that goes almost down the entire coastline. And this is kind of cool because it shows a relatively different perspective. And it's like almost this winding leading line that you get to follow all the way down the coast. So I don't think this is our hero shot, but I do think this is pretty different. Might work for a vertical crop if they want something for a vertical brochure or something. So again, I don't think that's the hero, but I'll end up throwing it in at the end, I bet. And then lastly, I do really like this shot. We have that close-up of the golf course and some of the amenities here for the resort. But the resort itself feels a little bit too small, but this one, I think this has some serious potential. Again, if they're not going to use it for like their website hero shot, they could use it in an advertisement or a brochure. There's lots of room for text and plenty of room to crop. So we'll keep that one rated 1 star as well. So now that I've culled this down to 20 or 25 images, let me take a minute and talk about my editing process here. Because all of these shots were done in nearly identical lighting conditions, my exposure isn't changing as we move because again, that sun is hardly moving at all. We're not going from inside to outside. We're in a relatively controlled environment. I can basically edit one of these and then apply the same adjustments to all of these images. I can then further cull these down and probably pull out the best 8 or 10 or 12, and I'll do some light finishing in Photoshop. I'll take them in, I'll clone up some dirt patches, I'll remove little distracting things. If there's people on the beach, if there's weird little, like cars in the way or something like that, I'll just zap those out in Photoshop. So there's not a ton of Photoshop intensive work for these shots. After I have them all done in Photoshop, I'll probably deliver 8 to 10, some wide shots, some tight shots, but again, most of these edits are going to be done in Lightroom. So for this lesson, guys, we are giving you a raw file so you can get a chance to mess with those sliders and see how it's going to affect the image. So now that I've explained that, let's jump into the hero shot and get our edit done in Lightroom. So here are my favorite sort of hero shots, and I like these for slightly different reasons. I think I'll end up delivering both of them. But I like this one because, like I said, you get to see some more of the grounds, you get to see the golf course, you get to see the bungalows and the private residences, and you have a better overview of the entire property. I like this one because you get so much of that amazing blue water, and you do get this mountain horizon back here. And again, this will be really good if they want to put text over it on a website or in a magazine or something like that. So let's just start with this one here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit R, and I'm going to turn on my crop tool here. And with that tool, I can kind of straighten this and level it out so that we're not feeling like we're too crooked in one direction. And if I, again, look at my vertical lines, if I zoom in here, you can see that for the most part, everything is lined up. It doesn't feel like the water is draining to one edge of the photo where the horizon's really crooked. So we'll straighten that guy out. And I think we can take a little bit off the bottom of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a 16:9 crop. And I'm just going to get some of that extraneous water out of the way. I'm going to leave that boat in. I do like the boat down there. And I'll leave the hotel right in the center. All right, so now let's go ahead and address the biggest issue with this image, and that is, even though it's shot at like high noon, it feels pretty flat and hazy. And we were shooting into the sun, so there's not a lot of saturation or depth to the clouds in the sky. The way I'm going to fix that is I'm going to come down to this HSL panel. This is hue, saturation, luminance. And I'm going to drop the luminance of the blues. And what that's going to do is increase the density of the blues in this frame. So if I go to my luminance panel here, and if I grab this little circle hand tool, whatever you want to call this guy right here, and select that blue sky, click and drag it down to make it darker, and drag it up to make it brighter. So this is how you can easily adjust the luminance of certain colors in your image. Now if you go too far, you'll start to get some of this funky like posterization or something in there, and it just looks a little bit cartoony. So make sure you don't go all the way to 100, go to like -50 or something. And you can turn that on and off and see what a big difference already that has made. We can also do that with the greens. So if I want to make these greens a little more dark, again, I can grab the same tool, select the grass, pull it down or go up with it accordingly to add some contrast to those greens. Now, in addition to adjusting the luminance, we probably also want to adjust the saturation. I want those blues to be nice and punchy, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab this tool. I'm going to add a little saturation to the blues, and we'll do a little saturation to the greens. All right, now if you really want to get crazy with it, you can adjust the hue, and you can possibly like go a little more teal with these or a little more purple. But I like that, again, I like that nice, almost stereotypical, quintessential island blue, so I'm going to leave that alone. I think we've done a good job here with our blues and pulling those out, but now I think we've got to deal with these blown out clouds. So go up to the highlight slider, and I'm just going to drop the highlights a little bit until we get some more detail in the clouds. And I don't think we need to pull up the shadows. If I pull up the shadows, things tend to get a little hazy again and flat, so I'm not going to touch that. What I am going to do next is I'm going to add a little bit of clarity. Some people really overdo this. I don't think you should ever go above like 15 on your clarity. It's mid-contrast, but it feels to me like as soon as you go too high with this, photos start to feel a bit over-edited. So we'll go to +12 on the clarity. And again, I want to add some saturation to the whole picture. I don't want to make it like cartoony. Like you can see when I go too far, it just looks ridiculous, right? So again, I think saturation can be used extremely sparingly. I'll go to like +10. And the same with vibrance, just a little bit. You want to be very, very gentle on this. And you can look at what an amazing difference we've made so far. Just by hitting that backslash, you can toggle between the before and after. All right, so things are looking pretty good. Again, big, big improvement from where we were previously. We're going to move right along here. And I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to add a vignette here. That is just a gentle darkening of the corners to sort of focus your eye into the photo. If you go too far, it looks really cheesy. Just super gentle, like -5 is something I prefer. And then if you have the new version of Lightroom, you can use this dehaze feature. And as you can see, we have some serious amounts of haze way in the back there. But again, if you use this too much, things tend to start to look fake very fast. So what we can do is just dehaze this ever so slightly. Maybe like +9 or so is plenty. That's just going to bring a little more detail out of that hazy background out there. So again, if I click on the backslash, you can see this image really sort of starts to come to life. Lastly, I've done all my color adjustments and clarity and highlights and stuff like that. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of contrast. You can do this with the contrast slider, or you can do this using curves if you pull your darks down and your lights up, whatever you think works better for you. They're very similar ways of doing different things. Curves will give you a little bit more control, and I really prefer to do my curves adjustments in Photoshop. So I'm just going to add a tiny smidge of contrast, like +3 or 4. And really, I think this is looking really, really good. We have nice, punchy, vibrant blues. We got plenty of detail in the sky. The last thing I'm going to do here is apply some lens corrections. If you go to the lens correction panel down here and click on Profile, if you go into Lightroom and Photoshop, Adobe will load the vast majority of commonly used lenses into the profile. So if you're a Canon, Nikon, Sigma, Tamron, I think Sony too, they have profile correction for all those lenses. Go ahead and click Enable Profile Correction. That will remove the barrel distortion and some of that wide angle vignetting. So that is pretty much going to finish that shot for us. Now, if you remember, I did mention that I'm going to sync and apply these same adjustments to all these photos. I'm going to hit Command A to select all of my culled images, Shift Command S or Shift Control S on Windows to bring up the Synchronize dialog box. Make sure everything is checked, except crop. I don't want to apply the crop to all these images because it's obviously going to be a different crop for every image. Go ahead and hit Enter. And what we're going to get, you'll see things happening down here in the film strip. All these images are going to start to take on the same exact effects that I did with this first image. So now that everything is applied to all of our images, we can go through and crop and pull out what I think are going to be the best shots. This one is pretty cool, a little bit different. I think we got a bit too much sky up there, so I'll bring this down, follow my rules of thirds here, into something like that. I think that's pretty neat. I'm going to rate all my favorites here 2 stars, just so I can keep track. And same thing here, this one's pretty cool. We are really, really high. I think we need a wider crop for this, honestly, to get rid of some of that extraneous water. That's pretty neat. And here's where we start to get into that gray area of having too much of this sort of rocky coastline, which is really cool in real life, but it's just not the most flattering angle for that. When you're looking out over this, it's like this amazing aquamarine blue color, but from the sky, you tend to get these browns and the grays, so I'm not really going to worry about this one right now. This one is pretty cool. This is some paddle boarders in a boat. If I crop this to like, let's go to 4x5 here. Crop it to something like that, kind of a minimal shot. If I turn on my information, I've still got what, like 25 megapixels to work with here, which is pretty impressive. And this will go just fine on a website, and it'll print beautifully in an ad. We'll rate that for 2 stars. And moving right along. And as you can see, all these adjustments are applied to all of our images already. This one's pretty neat too. Same thing, 16:9 crop. Something like that. I really love the clouds over here. Kind of like a really nice sweeping effect. All right, so 2 stars. And again, most of these I feel like are a little bit too funky with that bluish water here. But I do like this one. And I don't even think we need to crop it. I think it's almost perfect as it is. Just a quick rotation maybe. Something like that. And these, something about this just doesn't sit right with me, the brownish down here. So we'll leave those for the time being. And we'll go in a little bit further here. This one's kind of cool. It's like a nice wide sweeping vista of the whole hotel. And you really get to see the water and how amazing that is. If you're into snorkeling, I'm sure you'd appreciate this. We'll go to like a 2x3 crop. Might be a little oversaturated in this one. Again, here is what I'm guessing is going to be our hero shot, the one we edited earlier, so I'll rate that 2 stars. There's another option. I'm just going to crop this little rocky area out. Mix it up with the 4x5. This is kind of a cool little graphic beach shot from above. Give that a nice crop. Get rid of the parking lot there. Something like that. I would have preferred to have bring like a telephoto lens for these shots, but we had, I think, like 6 people in our helicopter. It was a little bit cramped up there while we were filming. And lastly, we've got 2 more here. This is our shot down the coastline. This is okay. I think I'm a little bit too wide. I really wanted to go, I'd crop it to something like that. And then this might be my favorite shot, but I don't think it's going to be the hero just because it's so far from the hotel. And I'm just going to, I feel like, again, some of these are a little bit too saturated. So I'll pull some colors out. They look a little less HDR-y. So if I go to all my 2-star rated photos here, we've got 11. Let's take our hero shot and go into Photoshop, put some finishing touches on it, and get on our way. All right, so let's go ahead and edit this in Photoshop. If you're in Lightroom, all you need to do is right-click and go to Edit in Adobe Photoshop. And if you have Photoshop installed on your computer, that should open right up in Photoshop. Okay, so this is a relatively simple image to fix here in Photoshop. The first thing you're going to do is double-click your background layer to unlock it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in here, and I'm going to look around and see what's bugging me. Obviously, this house under construction's got to go. I think this ugly burnt-out piece of tarmac's got to get out of there. And there might be a few people or like stray boats on the beach that I'm going to clone out. So on the whole, relatively simple. I might use a color replacement brush to paint in some more greenery in here. So let's start with that. I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to rename it Color Replacement. I'm going to grab my color replacement brush. You can hit B and then select the bottom tool or the one that says Color Replacement Tool. So using our color replacement tool, just go ahead and sample some of this dark green color right here and start painting that in over that burnt out grass. And if you think that's a little too bright, you can go a little darker with it. But I like to vary it. All right. Now, if you think that looks fake, don't worry, we're going to clean it up. I'm going to add a mask to that layer. I'm going to take a brush, regular brush, so go back to your normal brush here, and 100% opacity, somewhat soft and small. Go ahead and just paint out using a black brush where we've replaced that color in areas that you don't want it. And you can do that as much or as little as you want. I can take my brush again, go to the color replacement brush, take that green, and if you'll notice, for the most part, it stays relatively confined to that burnt out kind of patchy grass. You may need to take your brush on the layer mask again and paint that out where you don't need it. And if you zoom out at a wide view, that looks pretty dang good, you know? Much more attractive than that burnt out grass previously that was in there. Next problem is obviously this giant lot of dirt over here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy some of this this little forest area here, and I'm just going to paste it over that. Now I can't just go Control-C, Control-V. I got to be a little more accurate than that. So what I'll do is, first thing is I'm going to use my pen tool to get right in here and pen tool around the area that I want to replace. Get rid of all this sort of concrete in here. All right, so we've made our quick path around that. I'm going to hit Command Enter and Shift F6 to feather it. I want to make a new group. I'm going to call that group Pavement Replacement. And I'm going to apply that selection to a mask on that group. So now what I can do is I can make a big selection out here, just being very general with it. of all this forested area. I can Command-Shift-C, Command-V. That's going to drop it in this group, and I'll rename it Fig Trees. And I'm just going to move that sort of over and into that whole area that we just cut out and masked. And you can see it, honestly, if you do a good job with the pen tool, it's not going to be too tricky to make this believable. You can get that where you want it, and then you can refine that mask a little bit on the group so that things blend in a bit more seamlessly. Now, honestly, it just looks like the road kind of goes through cul-de-sac here, goes through a bushy area, and all is right. You can zoom in as far as you want and make that as perfect as you want using a mask and a brush. I get something like that. And again, if I go to 100% and I zoom all the way out, you would have not the faintest idea of what I replaced. In fact, I just lost track of what I replaced because, again, it looks pretty good at a nice wide angle. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to zoom out and again, add a new layer on top of everything. I'll name it Clone. And I'm just going to go in and like little things that are kind of bugging me, like people laying on the beach. We can clean those up. Miscellaneous chairs, and there's a kayak out here that doesn't really belong. And like this is kind of a mess right here. There's people on the sun share. So we'll just copy this one, paste it over that. Sort of get rid of the messy ones down here. Clean everything up. And just go around and check out anything else that's out of place. Again, just some general cleaning, decluttering. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So the last thing I want to address here is most of the time when I'm photographing architecture, of course, I want to line up my vertical lines and make sure that everything is nice and straight. Now, the one problem that you run into when you're shooting these aerial images is that sometimes you're not going to get those perfect verticals. And in an image like this, I wouldn't really worry so much about skewing them out. Like if I make this a new layer, and I'll name it verticals, in order to skew this out so that everything is vertical, I would really have to do a ton of pushing and pulling to get everything right. So like I could start going like this, and everything's just going to get stretched. We're going to lose a lot of pixels here. I don't think the image really gains that much by doing it. You kind of have to use your judgment on this. Like now if I zoom in, it looks like things are a little bit more vertical, maybe. They still have to come out even further. So we're making really big moves here to this picture just for the sake of a little vertical adjustment. When we're zooming out this much, it doesn't really matter. To me personally, that our verticals aren't perfect. I mean, like I said, you're so far from the architecture, nobody is going to be judging the client for not being able to build a straight building. So again, to summarize, if you want to pull your lines out and lose a ton of pixels to get these straight, you're losing a lot of landscape to do that. Go for it, but I personally don't think it's necessary, and I've never had a complaint as a result of it. So again, you got to use your judgment and kind of think for yourself on this one. So let's go ahead and save this. This is, I think, looking good. This is our final file. Go ahead and hit Command-S. And the nice thing about Lightroom is when you edit from Lightroom, this is going to automatically save right back into Lightroom next to our original file. So after I save this one back into Lightroom, I'm going to go through on our other images and do the same type of adjustments in Photoshop. Some light cloning, removing, taking out those big parking lots, that sort of thing. But for the most part, these are really simple images once you get the Lightroom workflow down. So that is sort of my process for shooting aerial photography for commercial clients. Hope you enjoyed coming along. I absolutely love those. If you ever get the chance to go up in a helicopter for a client, jump